married state by the English-born Katherine Philips appeared posthumously in the authorised 1667 edition of Poems by the most deservedly admired Mrs. Katherine Philips, the matchless Orinda, 3 years after her death from smallpox at the age of only 32. Philips is often celebrated as one of the first Englishwomen to achieve literary acclaim and to publish under her own name, albeit partially concealed by her pseudonym Orinda. She became an influential figure in a circle of poets and intellectuals known as the Society of Friendship, through which she promoted ideals of loyalty and platonic love, particularly among women. Within this circle, members used pseudonyms and wrote to one another in verse, creating a supportive space for women's expression that was rare at the time. In the poem, Phillips's speaker explores the complexities and burdens associated with marriage in the 17th century. Written during a time when societal norms pressured women to marry and remaining single was considered an aberration, she presents a critical view of the institution, contrasting the perceived virtues of marital life with the hardships it actually entails. Through her use of thoughtful language, she articulates the emotional and spiritual toll that marriage can impose on women, ultimately advocating for the value of singlehood and personal autonomy. This poem invites readers to reflect on the expectations of love and the realities of married life. As a woman whose father was a cloth merchant and whose mother's father was in the medical profession, Philips would have belonged to what was at this time an emerging middle class. In the 17th century, it was common for women of this class to enter into marriages arranged by their families. At the age of 16, which was not considered young during this period, Katherine was married to James Philips, a wealthy 24-year-old Welsh landowner. Once a girl reached puberty and was of childbearing age, families typically viewed it as appropriate for her to marry and begin having children. Early marriages were seen as a way to ensure that women fulfilled their expected roles as wives and mothers, contributing to family lineage, i.e. providing an heir, and property management. Consequently, the pressure to marry early was strong, with families often prioritising advantageous matches to secure social and economic stability. Phillips's work was significant not only for its literary merit, but also for its exploration of women's experiences, particularly regarding marriage and friendship, during a time when such themes were often overlooked in literature. While many of her poems idealise female friendship and explore loyalty and moral virtue, some of her writing, such as this poem, questions the social conventions around marriage and the restrictions and societal expectations it placed on women. Whether her tone in this verse can be seen as gently subversive or as ironic is up for discussion. There is a strong possibility that this poem could be read as slightly tongue-in-cheek. Her husband was, after all, a member of the Society of Friendship, who supported her literary pursuits, and so it is not unlikely that he would have read this poem himself. By presenting an idealised version of being unmarried, Phillips's speaker could be subtly highlighting the absurdities and limitations of the traditional views on marriage and femininity in her society. This irony invites readers to question the authenticity of her claims and consider the real challenges faced by women who remain single. Such a reading adds depth to the poem, suggesting that Philips was both engaging with and challenging the norms of her time. The poem comprises one stanza of 16 lines. It has a bass meter of iambic pentameter, di-dum, 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 di-dum. Philips does generally stick to this meter throughout, apart from lines 12, 13 and 14. Here we notice a 12-syllable line written in iambic hexameter, de-dum, 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 de-dum. Attend on matrimony and a husband too, followed by 2 10-syllable lines written in mixed metre, with substitutions of spondies, dum-dum, and trochees, dum-dee, e.g., therefore, madam, be advised by me, turn, apostate to love's levity. I'll discuss the effect of these rhythmic choices on our reading of the poem when I go through it line by line. All lines bar 1, line 11, are end-stopped. This lack of enjambment and caesura gives the poem a measured, deliberate pace, reinforcing the sense of finality in her statements about marriage. The predominantly end-stopped lines create a rhythmic regularity that mirrors the rigid and unyielding nature of her argument, as if each poetic line marks the closing of an argument or a truth. The absence of flowing enjambment contributes to the poem's tone of certainty and resolve, where each line stands as a self-contained reflection of Phillips's scepticism about the married state. The poem has a rhyme scheme of A, B, B, C, C, D, 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 E, F, G, G. All rhymes are single or masculine in that they fall on the final stressed syllable of the poetic line. Note that while 3/4 of the poem is written in rhyming couplets, we do notice a rhyming quatrain from lines 7 to 10, i.e. fears, tears, ears and prayers. Again, as with Phillips's decision to manipulate the rhythm to suit her poetic needs, I'll discuss this deliberate breaking of the rhyme scheme when I go through the poem line by line. The poem is relatively straightforward and contains little figurative language compared to other poetry of the period. Phillips primarily uses direct statements and plain diction, giving the poem a frank, almost conversational tone that reinforces her critical appraisal of marriage. The absence of elaborate metaphors or similes helps her convey a sense of practical, unvarnished wisdom, as if she is offering hard-earned advice without any romantic allusions. By keeping the language literal, Phillips emphasises the stark realities of married life and the societal pressures on women, lending the poem a grounded and candid quality that matches its message. This plainness allows her themes to resonate strongly, as she presents marriage not as a poetic ideal, but as a real, often burdensome commitment. Difficulties with the language in this poem tend to arise from the use of vocabulary that is no longer in common usage, such as dissemble, a spelling variation of dissemble, which means to conceal, apostate, which means having abandoned a religious or political belief, and levity, which means light-heartedness. There are a number of spelling differences, such as careful, innocent, and cries. It's very likely that Phillips followed the conventions of her time, which allowed for a degree of variability in spelling. While modern readers might see her spelling as incorrect by today's standards, they reflect the fluid nature of English spelling in her era, rather than an error on her part. The title A Married State is significant because it immediately frames the poem as a commentary on the institution of marriage, suggesting a focus on the condition or experience of being married. Rather than idealising marriage as was common in her time, Phillips uses the title to set up a critical examination of its challenges and limitations for women. By referring to marriage as a state, she emphasises its all-encompassing nature, hinting at the ways it can define and confine a woman's identity, in contrast to the freedom and contentment she associates with singlehood in the poem. The poem begins with Phillips's bold thesis statement that a married state affords but little ease. In other words, being married does not provide a huge amount of comfort or freedom from worry or effort. This line clearly and concisely introduces Phillips's central argument and sets the tone for the entire poem. By beginning with a direct statement on the hardships of marriage, Phillips positions this line as her guiding premise, around which she builds her critique of marital life. The straightforward, declarative nature of this line establishes her stance from the outset, framing the poem as a persuasive piece that challenges societal expectations and invites readers to reconsider the ease of marriage for women. Note the use of the colon at the end of the line, which signals that she is going to expand and explain what she means by this. She continues, "The best of husbands are so hard to please. Even those husbands who treat their wives well, she complains, are demanding and difficult to make happy. This is self-evident," she continues, "because this in wife's careful faces you may spell, though they dissemble their misfortunes well." Note the spelling of wifes here, which in modern English would be wives with a V and an apostrophe at the end to make it grammatically correct. The adjective careful means full of care or worry, rather than its modern meaning of being cautious or attentive. The verb spell just means read in this context, while the verb dissemble is an archaic spelling of dissemble, which means hide. The anastrophe in this sentence, which is where the normal order of words in a sentence is inverted, can make its meaning slightly harder to access. In normal syntax, it would be something like this, i.e. the fact that being married is troublesome, you may spell in wives' careful faces. In other words, married women give themselves away because the burden of the anxieties, obligations and responsibilities they bear is written all over their faces, even though they make the effort to dissemble or hide their sorrows. In the 5th and 6th lines, Phillips proceeds to praise the life of unmarried women. "A virgin state is crowned with much content. It's always happy, as it's innocent." Note that being unmarried is equated with being a virgin here, as in the 17th century, and particularly among the upper classes, societal norms held that sexual activity, especially for women, was only acceptable within marriage. Spinsterhood was seen as an undesirable state, but it carried the expectation of sexual purity as well. Women who did not marry were expected to live chaste, respectable lives. It's important to take note that Phillips's speaker is not arguing for sexual liberation here. She's just advocating for the recognition of the burdens and limitations imposed by marriage on women. While her complaints about the married state in 17th century Britain are probably well-founded, we mustn't overlook the fact that she is promoting an unrealistic, idealised view of the unmarried state, signalled by the adverb always. Her portrayal suggests a romantic notion of independence that may not reflect the reality for many spinsters of her time, particularly those without financial security or social standing. Unmarried women often faced significant societal challenges, including economic instability and social marginalisation, which Phillips's depiction overlooks. Spinsters in a precarious financial situation might have found Phillips's characterisation overly simplistic and disconnected from their experiences, as their realities often involved struggles for respect and support in a society that placed a high value on marriage. Phillips's choice of the verb crowned here is an interesting one. It is very possible that this is a subtle allusion to Queen Elizabeth I, who is famously known as the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth, who had only died at the beginning of the century, had used her unmarried status as a powerful symbol, asserting her independence and dedication to her nation, over personal or marital ties. By referencing a virgin state crowned with happy satisfaction, Philips could be subtly invoking the image of Elizabeth, who represented an alternative model of female autonomy and authority that was rare in Phillips's own time. We're now going to consider the next 4 lines as a unit. No blustering husbands to create your fears, no pangs of childbirth to extort your tears, no children's cries for to offend your ears, few worldly crosses to distract your prayers. Philips skillfully uses an asyndetic list here to enumerate the seemingly endless freedoms of an unmarried life. The adjective blustering means talking in a loud, aggressive or indignant way with little effect. In other words, talking a lot but not saying very much, and creates a sweepingly unflattering portrait of husbands. A wife's purpose, of course, is to have children and lots of them, so they are also forced to go through, often annually, the pangs or agonies of childbirth. This is painful and dangerous enough, even in the 21st century, with hygienic hospitals, an array of drugs and modern surgical techniques to help a woman along. Imagine what it was like in the 17th century without anything to take away the pain or to fight infection. Not only do women have to suffer this, but once the children are born, their repeated cries offend your ears. The verb offend here evokes the way in which these incessant sounds irritate and distress the mother, presumably to the point that she is driven up the wall and cannot hear herself think. Indeed, a virgin state is one where there are few worldly crosses to distract your prayers. The adjective worldly here means of this world as opposed to that which is spiritual. The word crosses alludes to the phrase to have a cross to bear and is used to describe a personal struggle or challenge that you have to face but cannot easily overcome. It refers to Christ carrying the cross to Calvary for his crucifixion. Here, Philips is saying that if you are unmarried, you have much fewer of these daily struggles and mundane concerns, such as managing a household, raising children, and supporting your husband's interests, which can distract you from spiritual devotion or your own personal pursuits. What is interesting about this quatrain is that Philips makes a powerful structural choice as she temporarily dispenses with her pattern of rhyming couplets so that all 4 of the lines rhyme: fears, tears, ears, and prayers. By breaking the couplet pattern and introducing a quatrain, Philips creates a sense of escalation that feels like a litany of grievances, each line compounding the last. The repeated ears rhyme not only emphasises the unrelenting nature of these marital burdens, but also builds a rhythmic intensity, as if each rhyme is another hammer blow underscoring the drawbacks of marriage. This, coupled with the anaphora of the repeated no at the beginning of the first 3 lines of the quatrain, creates a repetitive, almost chant-like quality and heightens the emotional impact to express the speaker's frustration more forcefully. The quatrain format allows her to dwell on these marital disadvantages without the typical release offered by a couplet's closure. So the complaints accumulate, echoing the wearisome and oppressive reality she's depicting. Thus, or in this way, her speaker says, are you freed from all the cares that do attend on matrimony and a husband too? Note that it's not so much the advantages that being unmarried brings, but the lack of the disadvantages of the married state that she is promoting here. Once more, Philips makes some interesting structural choices. The 11th line is enjambed, the only incidence in the poem, as if the feeling of liberation is allowed to spill over onto the next line. In this 12th line, attend on matrimony and a husband too. She now breaks the poem's base metre with a 12-syllable line written in iambic hexameter, di-dum, di-dum, de-dum, 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 de-dum. This use of an overlong line disrupts the rhythm, perhaps mirroring the way marriage and a husband might impose additional, often unwelcome complexities on a woman's life. This structural choice is effective because the break in the meter creates a sense of heaviness and excess, reflecting the very burden she's describing. As she embarks on the poem's final quatrain, Phillips's speaker recommends her unmarried female readers to reject the institution of marriage outright, firstly by turning their back on the levity or giddiness and light-heartedness that is brought by love. Therefore, madam, be advised by me, turn apostate to love's levity. Apostasy, the abandoning or renouncing of one's faith, was viewed as a threat to the religious and social order and was often met with severe punishment in the 17th century, particularly in Europe, where religion was deeply intertwined with law and governance. This context makes Phillips's use of the term apostate especially powerful. By calling for women to turn apostate to love's levity, she could be provocatively suggesting a need to reject the religion of love and marriage, a radical statement given the societal emphasis on marital roles for women. Even though Phillips has now reverted to pentameter, this disruption in the meter continues in these two lines. In the first line, we have a pattern of I am, trochee, 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 I am. Therefore, madam, be advised by me. This mixed meter creates a strong, almost insistent rhythm, emphasising each stressed syllable. The trochees in the middle of the line create a sense of urgency or authority, as if the speaker is pushing their advice forward with force. This rhythmic choice reinforces the speaker's tone and may suggest that the advice is firm and uncompromising, aligning well with the poem's asserted critical view of marriage. In the second line, her tone is even more emphatic, as we have a pattern of spondy, I am, trochee, spondy, I am, where 7 of the 10 syllables in the line are stressed. Turn, apostate to love's levity. By breaking the conventional iambic pentameter with spondies and trochees, especially in a line that calls for apostasy from love's levity, she creates a sense of defiance both in content and form. This layered rebellion is powerful. Just as she questions society's rigid expectations of marriage, she simultaneously challenges the rules of poetic meter, underscoring her criticism of any imposed conformity. Phillips's skill in pairing structure with meaning adds depth to her critique, inviting readers to consider the freedom that lies in rejecting convention, both personally and artistically. She concludes the poem by urging her female readers to suppress wild nature if she dare rebel, as she acknowledges that their instinct will be to fall in love, and so they will have to exercise a huge amount of self-discipline and self-restraint to keep it in check. Her final piece of advice is meant to be reassuring for those who fear eternal damnation for remaining single. There's no such thing as leading apes in hell. Here, Phillips is referring to an old English proverb, such as die maids do all lead apes in hell. The expression was a common saying in the 16th and 17th centuries, often used to describe the supposed fate of unmarried women or spinsters. It implied that if a woman did not marry, she would be condemned to this rather bizarre form of punishment for failing to fulfil her societal duty of marrying and bearing children. In conclusion, Phillips's speaker uses this poem to challenge the idealised view of marriage by presenting a restrained, almost clinical examination of its burdens. Through structured, end-stop lines and a tone of conviction, she articulates the peace and freedom that can be found in remaining single, contrasting it with the hardships of a married life. Ultimately, Phillips's poem serves as a rare 17th century expression of female independence, questioning societal expectations and affirming the value of personal choice for women. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.